Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
That indeed you are. And today we're going to talk about conducting home funerals and natural burials. Well,
that might be the truer than you think.
I'm sure there are barriers to burials, but with Donna Baker, and she is the founder of the Columbus Community Deathcare. She's an ANELDA-trained death doula, a home funeral guide, a death educator, and wise with everything associated with death, no doubt. So welcome, Donna.
Hello, good morning.
All right, good morning. So we're really talking about, of course, we focus a lot on sustainability here, and I guess there's nothing more sustainable than death, really. So let's talk about how.
Oh my word, we're on a roll this morning.
Yeah, well, it just sort of seems to me, as somebody with only a passing acquaintance with this, that
death or funerals.
Well, both, and
Okay.
and that the funeral industry, like a lot of our systems, has become corporatized, anesthetized. All of these other things, taking it outside of the realm of sustainable and natural. So my guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're kind of trying to push back in the other direction. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. And of course, it's not just me. There's a lot of folks who are doing this sort of community death care work. Death doulas and death educators are part of it, but there's also a growing group of folks I've been working with down in Athens. We call ourselves the Southeast Ohio Natural Burial Working Group. We're still a working group, but we're looking for some property down around the Chansey area to start a natural burial ground. So, it's there's lots of us, and it's a growing movement, which is very exciting. But yeah, I think what we're really talking about is, there are plenty of us who are caring for the earth as we're living. We care for the earth every day, and we do things. We practice sustainable living practices, and so why not, push that into our dying and into our death? So finding ways to care for the earth when we die, and really even more than just caring for, but giving back to the earth by using our bodies as a source of energy, putting our bodies back into the earth in a natural way so that we can become soil again.
One of the things that occurs to me is really it's more than sustainability. It's resiliency, and the idea that we could be in charge of our own death, but also the idea of honoring that death with a home funeral. And maybe you could walk us through a little bit about what it takes to have a home funeral, and then what it would look like if we were going to access a green burial.
Sure. Yeah, when we talk about natural burial, it's a little more palatable, I think, for folks to just talk about the practicalities of burial. It's something we're used to talking about. We talk about pre-planning and burial plots and stuff like that. But you're right, to get there, we have to take a step back, and we have to talk about the dying, and what it takes to get ourselves and get each other to a natural burial ground. That oftentimes starts with a home funeral. And a home funeral is a practice that involves caring for our dying at home. And if our loved ones don't die at home, it involves moving them home after they've transitioned, which is perfectly legal, and so it's a right that we all have. Caring for our dying, having a service for them at home, and if you don't have a home that's conducive to something like that, borrowing a space, renting a yoga studio, or using a church, a room in a church. We don't all have a house that's large enough to do something like have a home viewing, but even if you don't, there are lots of alternatives to finding good spaces to do that. Again, that's the practical stuff, but the emotional and really, I think, spiritual side to that is caring for our loved one's body after death. So stuff that we have always done, right? It's not a new practice. It's the idea of washing a body, anointing a body with oil, shrouding a body, laying that body out in a space where people can come and say goodbye and honor the person that we love that's now gone. And that can really take place over the course of, an hour, or I've worked with families who have home funerals that take 8 or 9 hours. It's all a matter of using that time in the way that best suits the family, because that time is really a healing time. It's not the sort of conventional thing that we're used to, where we're sitting around in metal folding chairs and drinking, bad coffee out of styrofoam cups. It's we're dressed in clothes that we normally wouldn't wear, and we feel stuffy, and we can't wait to get out of there. It's something very, very different than that. It's being in each other's homes, and someone brings a guitar and plays music, and someone else maybe making a big pot of soup in the kitchen, and the body is laid out for several hours, and we really take turns being with each other and being with the body. So it's, I say all that because I think it's helps to really imagine what it is that we're talking about when we say a home funeral, because most of us have this very conventional idea of what a funeral looks like in our minds, and can be very it's very different than that. It can be simplified and minimalist and very beautiful.
Affordable.
Affordable.
Yeah, and affordable.
Yeah. Well, what kind of barriers are there to this, Donna? Because I can just assume when people think about bringing a dead body into your home, there's going to be all sorts of health and safety issues that people are going to jump up and down about, even though it is a very natural situation. But what kind of restrictions does the government or our society put in place?
Well, the restrictions are all cultural and social. There aren't any legal restrictions. In every state, you are legally allowed to remove a body from a hospital or a morgue or a nursing facility or hospice. You are legally allowed to bring that body home and honor that body in the space where you feel is most natural and important to you.
Do you have to have, excuse me, do you have to have the power of attorney at death or any kind of legal document to do that?
You just need to be next of kin. You need to have permission from next of kin. Of course, the hard part is, being an advocate in that very often, emotionally fueled time. You have to be able to say, we like to take this body home, right? So that's when things get difficult. But
hopefully you said it before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or you have a doula, someone who's an advocate for you to speak those ideas into practice.
You could also, couldn't you also have that into your will or add a codicil to the will that says that's your wish?
Yeah, I'm not really an expert on wills. That's more for our law friends, but living wills, healthcare power of attorney, things like that, right? That would be a place where you could have those wishes documented and notarized so that they are legal.
Well, there's a long history. I mean, obviously, these systems that we think are normal and everlasting are usually fairly recent in development, but there's a long history about home funerals. When you were talking about this, I know the term sitting Shiva, I don't know exactly everything that's involved with that, but it just sort of seems like these are traditions that have existed for a long time and we just need to recapture them.
Sure. I mean, that's that's really what this, I think that's what this whole movement is about, not just with the natural burials, but the home funeral and really home death care. Historically, families served and cared for their dead, not just because we had to, but because it was really a primal need. It was a way to pay respect to for the life of the person that we were letting go of. And this sort of death care really allowed us to bear witness to death as a human experience. Really
Yeah,
didn't shift.
I can give an example of that because I remember when my father died and it was very sudden, but when we all got together and you could actually see the body and stand there, then at least for me it was like, wow, this is real. I mean, this is for true, you know? And I think that was important. I never would have imagined that I needed that kind of reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. We kind of got talked out of doing these things for ourselves and for each other. And we got talked into the idea that this was the work for specialists, for people like embalmers and funeral directors. But yeah, and when that shift happened, we became, more estranged from death. We didn't really see death as a natural part of the life cycle anymore. It became a medicalized event instead of a social and cultural event.
I think the medical model has had a lot to do with that because there were undertakers and people depended on that sometimes for the casket or help with the body or whatever. And I think the medical model has taught us that we should be basically let them handle it all. It's a messy experience in life, so we'll just handle it for you. Which brings me back to what I was thinking. When Jay first asked you about the challenges, is that it strikes me that perhaps the biggest challenge is the emotional challenge that comes from death and the fact that we don't have a plan. Often people don't have words in this culture, we don't seem to have a conversation that we generally have around important things like sex and death and maybe even birth. I don't know. And I just wonder, what are some of the barriers emotionally, and what could we do if, for example, say I wanted to have a home funeral, but I know my relatives would have a hissy fit. What are some things I could do to try to emotionally ease the way there?
Mm-hmm. It's just all about the talking, right? It seems so simple to say, and I know it's really challenging for most people. Um, but we need to find ways to have these conversations while we're having right now. We finding ways when it's, a beautiful sunny Wednesday spring afternoon, and the last thing that people think about is sitting around and talking about death at the dinner table, with family, or on a phone call, with a friend. It doesn't seem like the thing you want to spend part of your day doing, but we can just talk about it in a really open and honest way, just like with sex and birth and money and all the hard things. The more that we can talk about it, the less terrifying it becomes, and the more we start to understand it as a natural part of the life cycle. And I work with people all the time to sort of navigate these difficult conversations with their family members. I'm a fan of the awkward conversation. I love really digging in deep and talking about stuff that doesn't always come easily, just because I'm a curious person. And I think that the key to having some of these conversations is just, recognizing maybe that there are good reasons, and the two good reasons that always come to mind for me are, it's really a gift. If you can't think of it just as a curious way to talk and an important heart-opening way to talk, you can think of it as a gift, because knowing what your people want while they're alive and healthy will go such a long way when they're sick or when they're dying. And also the financial savings is just an incredible incentive. I
Okay,
mean,
well, Donna, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second
Sure.
here to remind everybody that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you again, it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. So, and we are talking about death, speaking of the end of the world as we know it. And Donna, we're joined by Donna Baker, and we're talking about home funerals and natural burials. And we've been talking a bit about sort of having the celebration within your home, some of the issues around there, the advantages of that. But I did want to touch on the natural burial. So hey, Donna, could you tell us, sort of contrast how we view burials today in our industrialized death machine, and
Just spell it like it is, Jay.
I know, and how does that contrast with the idea or the concepts of natural burial? Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a wide open thing there.
Yeah, well, our industrialized death machine is set up in a way that really serves and benefits the death machine, right? We have these marketed packages that sell services that benefit the industry, and those services are marketed in a way that create fear within us. So we have to have our pre-planned funeral or a pre-planned plot, and we have to think about these things in a way not that ease us into understanding and appreciating death as part of the life cycle, but in a way that freaks us out and reminds us that if we don't make these plans now, where will our bodies end up? What will happen to us? We every time I hear about a GoFundMe set up for a family that's trying to raise money to cover funeral expenses, I feel ill. These are just this profit machine it reaches all of us, and there are really so many more simple and effective ways of handling these things. Another way in which this profit machine has sort of convinced us that it's the way to go is, the survivors of a death are set up to be an audience. We see the body's quickly removed from us. It's taken off somewhere where the experts handle it, and we're not even invited to see the body again until after some careful cosmetic preparation, right? The body's been dressed and made up and the hair's been done. And then we're invited back to see the body after it's been embalmed. And we say things like, this person looks
so good. She looks so good.
Mm-hmm.
She's asleep
Right?
with her glasses on.
Well, I can tell you that
Yeah.
I thought when I saw my dad's body, I thought, man, he looks kind of made of plastic. I mean,
Yeah, I
I
feel
Well, he
could.
had
opposite
been
too.
killed in the ocean. He
Yeah.
probably was heavily damaged.
But anyway, yeah, you're right. I had never thought about it as kind of performance art, and it's a performance that you're not allowed to ask how much is the cost of admission. I mean, they just, it's like, tut, 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 my son, don't you care about your dead relative? Of course they need a mahogany casket.
Right. And if you
Well, the
and if
cheapest
you really
ones are thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And if you really cared, wouldn't you spend more? Wouldn't your father want to be in the finest, vehicle to take him off to whatever is next?
Sure, and a grave site up on a hill so he can look out over the ocean like he's really going to be sitting there looking out, so.
Mhm.
Well, it's
I mean, the
really
average cost.
It's really for the person, the people who are left behind. That isn't the time to be making decisions like that about spending money you don't have, or even if you do have it. I think that's the real emotional challenge in this,
Right.
is that we have to find a way to have a conversation.
Well, you were,
before it
Donna,
happens.
you were going to tell us what these things cost. I mean, what's the ticket to this show?
Yeah, well, the average cost of a conventional, death machine funeral right now is about $8,000 to $10,000, and it's hard for me to even wrap my head around that for so many reasons, but mainly because I birthed my daughters at home. my husband and I paid for our wedding. It was, my dress was off the rack of a bridesmaid's rack for $100. We're just accustomed to DIYing so many of these milestones that when I hear that number, I'm just rattled. I can't imagine trying to come up with the amount of money that is required, seemingly required, to handle
Well,
this
let me tell you, Dawn,
experience.
I just went through this with a friend whose mother died somewhat unexpectedly, and that woman was a very poor woman, and she had been on disability for many years, but she had 2 insurance policies for her death cost. And the daughter, who's quite shy, asked me to go with her, which I did do during the pandemic, and it was horrendous. It was just horrendous. And so, the cheapest thing ended up costing $11,000 for very bare bones. And boy, they socked it to her when they knew she had the insurance. They're like, we'll handle the insurance policy and we'll give you the difference and all that kind of stuff. It was a nightmare to me. I just sat there at one point when we were at the cemetery, and she had to buy a plot, and they had all these expensive stones that go on top, and I asked what the one cost. It was beautifully etched and everything, and they said $35,000. And I looked at my friend and I said, this isn't the day to decide on headstones, because they were pushing.
Got it.
This is the day where you figure out where's your mom going to end up that makes you feel best, because you're the one going to visit. And she did listen to me. Even then, it cost, I don't know, $3,000 for a little square thing. So it was just unbelievable to me. And I just thought, well, if people really knew how this worked, wouldn't a lot of people make a different choice if they had education?
Well, in contrast, Donna, you're working on a natural burial site, you said, down in Athens County. And how would that work? How would that be different? I mean, if I had a loved one who passed away, or I did, and somebody wants to stick me down there, how does that process work?
Yeah, and what's it cost?
Yeah, well, I would say at the high end, natural burial grounds usually run around maybe $3,000, and that's all inclusive. When I say like the average cost of a conventional funeral is 7 to 10, what happens is, you have all of these things are added in. You have the basic cost, and then they tell you at the last minute it's $600 to transport the body from the funeral home to the grave site, and then if the family wants to view the body, it's an extra $2,000, and then, like you said, the headstone comes from somewhere else, and that's another, $5,000 to $30,000. So with a natural burial, the costs are typically upfront. What we're trying to do in Athens is make sure that that everyone has an opportunity to be buried, so all families can afford a grave site. And on the high end, most of the natural burial sites around the country run around $3,000. And the way some people might be surprised that it's that high, but really what's involved is let me try to rephrase that. Most of the people who are interested in having that kind of burial, they're also interested in caring for the land. So a conservation burial ground is what we're working on in Athens, and that's really a way to make sure that land is preserved, forever. And it's not solely about the burial, but it's also about the land. So people don't mind spending their, $2,000 or $3,000, knowing that they're preserving this land. Bodies are placed, it's planned out where bodies are buried. They're placed strategically so that the soil can be enriched and enhanced in certain areas. And there's a land steward that's involved. The land steward needs paid, things like that. But to get it up to that point, like even getting yourself to the natural burial ground, you usually come from a home funeral, and the home funeral cost is between nothing and maybe the cost of hiring a home funeral guide. That's a service that I offer for $50 an hour. Most families will ask me for that guidance at around 3, 4, maybe 5 hours worth of work. So if you even imagine at the high end having a home funeral with the bells and whistles, it's probably not going to be more than $500. People who have home funerals, they're doing things in all of these non-traditional ways. So there aren't the big overpriced bouquets of flowers. People go out on their property and bring in, greens or branches or flowers that they pick. People make their own food.
What about the casket part of it? How does that work with the green burial site?
Some people will use a shroud. Their bodies will be shrouded. So in a simple linen, or maybe a quilt that they made themselves, or a bed sheet. So that's, again, $0 to whatever minimal amount of dollars. Some people will be buried in a cardboard box. So to be a true natural burial, it's required that the body has not been embalmed and that you're buried in a container that will fully biodegrade. So a wooden box, a pine box, a cardboard box, and all of those things are much less expensive. Some people build their own casket.
Then if I were buried there, would I have the right to put up flowers or plant trees or
have a marker
bushes?
of some sort?
Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's specific to the burial grounds, but most places will allow indigenous plants and bushes and trees. The grave markers they have to be flat. So if you decided to spend money on having something engraved and something that had a name or a date or anything like that on it, it would just need to be able to be nestled into the ground, flat. Nothing sits above the ground, perpendicular. But most people just choose to plant a tree or a bush. There are GPS locations, so everyone knows where their person is.
Oh, that's cool.
One of the neat things.
Well, Donna, I'm going to have to stop you there because, as with all things, we've come to the end of our time, which is right in true saying with what we've been talking about. So I want to thank Donna Baker. We've been talking about home funerals, natural burials. I want to thank our award-winning producer, Adam Rich, and I want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us, listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
Yeah, play nice with others by helping your family plan what's going to happen when you die.
Is that what she said?
She did.
All right, till next time. Bye-bye.
Blossom in the night, know the stars dancing in twilight. Soon we'll be together, all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and the children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at BlueRockStation.com.